Monique's heart raced as the gunman's voice sliced through the tense silence. The barrel of his weapon was locked on her, its metallic sheen glinting ominously under the harsh store lights. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to move, to run, but she forced herself to remain still. She knew that one wrong move could escalate the situation beyond control. "You," the man barked again, jabbing the gun in her direction. "I said, where do you think you're going?" Monique raised her hands slowly, her palms facing outward. Her voice, though trembling, was calm and deliberate. "I wasn't going anywhere. I just dropped something." Her mind raced. She wasn't just thinking about herself. There were children crying in the background, parents holding them tightly. Elderly shoppers crouched low, their faces pale with fear. And then there was Karen, still frozen on the floor, her face ashen and her bravado completely gone. Monique knew she had to tread carefully, for everyone's sake. The gunman sneered, clearly unimpressed. He waved the weapon again, motioning for her to return to the center of the aisle. "Get back over there. No funny business." Monique obeyed, moving slowly and deliberately. As she made her way back to her cart, her eyes darted around the store. She noticed a young stock boy peeking out from behind a shelf in the cereal aisle, his cell phone pressed tightly to his ear. He was calling the police, thank God. But they weren't here yet, and until they arrived, it was up to her to keep this volatile situation from spiraling out of control. The gunman turned his attention to the rest of the room. "All of you, empty your pockets and put everything in the cart," he yelled, pointing to an empty shopping cart near the front of the store. "Cash, jewelry, phones, everything. If anyone tries to be a hero, they'll regret it." A ripple of fear swept through the room as people began reaching into their pockets and purses, reluctantly tossing their belongings into the cart. Monique watched the scene unfold, her mind working overtime to come up with a plan. She couldn't stand by and let this man terrorize everyone, but she also couldn't risk putting anyone in danger by acting rashly. Karen, meanwhile, had managed to inch her way closer to Monique. Her face was a mix of panic and desperation as she whispered frantically, "Do something. You can't just stand there." Monique shot her a sharp look. "Quiet," she hissed. "You'll get us all killed." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but the icy warning in Monique's eyes silenced her. For once, Karen didn't argue. She pressed her lips tightly together and huddled closer to the floor, her hands clutching her designer bag like a lifeline. The gunman moved through the aisles, barking orders and grabbing whatever valuables people surrendered. As he approached Monique's cart, she felt a surge of resolve. She had faced bigger challenges in her life, hostile boardrooms, ruthless competitors, and even the occasional death threat. She wasn't about to let this man take control without a fight. "Hey," Monique said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. The gunman stopped and turned toward her, his eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" "I said, hey," Monique repeated, stepping forward slightly. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her voice remained steady. "What's your plan here? You're going to rob a grocery store and run? You think you're getting away with this?" A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Karen's eyes widened, and she shook her head vehemently, as if to say, "Are you crazy?" The gunman's face twisted in anger. "You got a death wish or something, lady? Shut up before I make you." Monique held her ground, her gaze unwavering. "You don't want to do this," she said firmly. "You're not thinking straight. Whatever brought you here today, this isn't the answer." The man's hand tightened around the gun, and for a moment, Monique thought she'd pushed too far. But then his eyes flickered, a brief hesitation that told her she had struck a nerve. He was unstable, yes, but he wasn't beyond reason, at least, not yet. "Shut up," he barked again, though his voice wavered slightly. "You don't know anything about me." "You're right," Monique said, taking another cautious step forward. I don't. But I know this isn't who you are. It doesn't have to be. The tension in the room was suffocating. No one dared to move or speak as Monique and the gunman stared each other down. She could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on her, their silent prayers for her safety hanging in the air. Karen, unable to stay silent any longer, hissed, "Are you out of your mind? He's got a gun." "Exactly," Monique shot back without looking at her. "Which is why you need to stay quiet." Karen's mouth snapped shut, her fear outweighing her usual inclination to argue. Monique turned her attention back to the gunman, who was now visibly agitated. His grip on the weapon was unsteady, and his eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape route. The sound of distant sirens broke through the tension, their wail growing louder with each passing second. The gunman's head snapped up, and a look of panic crossed his face. He turned back to Monique, his expression a mix of anger and desperation. "This is your fault," he snarled, raising the gun and pointing it directly at her. "You couldn't just keep your mouth shut." The room seemed to freeze. Monique felt her breath catch in her throat, but she refused to back down. "It's over," she said quietly. "Put the gun down before it's too late." The sirens were deafening now, signaling that the police were just outside. The gunman's hands trembled as he looked between Monique and the front entrance. He was cornered, and he knew it. And then, without warning, the doors burst open, and a team of armed officers stormed into the store, their weapons drawn. "Drop the gun," one of them shouted. "Now." The gunman hesitated for a split second before throwing the weapon to the ground. The officers moved in quickly, restraining him and leading him away. The tension in the room broke like a dam, and a collective sigh of relief swept through the crowd. Monique sank to the floor, her legs shaking as the adrenaline drained from her body. Karen, still clutching her bag, looked at her with wide, incredulous eyes. "What the hell were you thinking?" Karen demanded. "You could have gotten us all killed." Monique looked at her, her expression calm despite the chaos around them. "I was thinking about everyone in this store," she said simply. "Including you." The grocery store buzzed with the mundane hum of suburban life. Shoppers maneuvered their carts down neatly organized aisles, grabbing produce, snacks, and household items as soft elevator music played in the background. For Monique Devereaux, this was the perfect place to disappear. Clad in a simple hoodie, worn jeans, and sneakers, her disguise was flawless. No one would ever guess she was one of the wealthiest women in the country, a self-made billionaire known for her innovative tech empire and philanthropic efforts. Today, she just wanted to feel normal. She pushed her cart through the fresh produce section, inspecting a bunch of bananas. The fluorescent lights gleamed off her flawless skin, her natural beauty understated without the usual polish of high fashion and makeup. Monique enjoyed these moments away from the limelight. She loved to observe people, to blend in, and to remind herself of where she had come from, a humble background filled with determination, grit, and lessons learned the hard way. As she reached for a bag of apples, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Excuse me, are you planning to move, or do you think you own this place?" Monique turned to find a woman standing a few feet away, her arms crossed and her face twisted into a scowl. She was a textbook Karen, platinum blonde bob, pastel sweater draped over her shoulders, and an air of entitlement that could fill the entire store. "Pardon me?" Monique asked, keeping her voice calm. "I said, are you going to move?" "You're hogging the aisle," Karen snapped, her voice dripping with annoyance. Monique glanced down the aisle. It was wide enough for at least 3 carts to pass comfortably. She was standing on one side, and Karen was parked on the other. There was plenty of room, but it was clear this wasn't about space. "I'm sorry if I'm in your way," Monique said politely, stepping aside to let Karen pass. Karen didn't move. Instead, she let out a huff and looked Monique up and down, her eyes narrowing as if she were inspecting something distasteful. You people always think you can just stand wherever you want, don't you? Monique's stomach tightened. She'd encountered people like Karen before, those who saw her skin color before anything else. She took a deep breath, reminding herself to stay composed. She wasn't here to make a scene. "Excuse me," Monique said, her voice steady but firm. "You heard me," Karen said, her lips curling into a smirk. "Taking up space, wasting time. Probably don't even know how to read the labels on half this stuff." The insult hung in the air, drawing the attention of a few nearby shoppers. Monique felt her pulse quicken, but she refused to let Karen get under her skin. Instead, she focused on maintaining her composure. "I'm just here to shop like everyone else," Monique said evenly. "If you'll excuse me, I'll finish my shopping." As Monique moved to walk past Karen, the woman stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Oh, no, you don't. People like you need to learn some manners. You don't just get to act like you own the place." Monique's patience was wearing thin. She could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in the aisle on her, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. She wasn't sure what Karen's endgame was, but she wasn't about to let herself be bullied. "I'm not looking for trouble," Monique said. "Please let me pass." Karen's smirk widened. "Trouble? Oh, honey, you've already caused it. Just look at yourself. Dressed like that, acting like you belong here." Monique clenched her jaw, her mind racing. She'd dealt with discrimination before, but this was something else entirely, a brazen, unapologetic attack in the middle of a public place. And yet, she couldn't risk blowing her cover. If the tabloids got wind of this, it would be all over the news by morning. Karen's voice grew louder, her insults becoming more pointed. "You probably don't even have enough money to pay for that cart. People like you are always looking for handouts, aren't you?" Monique felt her hands tremble as she gripped the cart. Her mind flashed back to the years she had spent clawing her way to the top, defying every stereotype and expectation. She wasn't about to let this woman belittle her achievements, or her humanity. "I don't know what your problem is," Monique said, her voice laced with quiet strength, "but I suggest you think carefully before you say another word." Karen laughed, a shrill, grating sound. "Oh, is that a threat? What are you going to do? Call security? Please. They'll take one look at you and throw you out." The words hit like a slap, but Monique refused to let them see her falter. She straightened her spine, her presence commanding despite her casual attire. "I don't need to call security," Monique said, her voice steady. "But you might want to think about how you're representing yourself right now." Karen's smirk faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered, her voice rising. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. I don't care who you think you are. You're just—" Before Karen could finish her sentence, a loud crash echoed through the store. Everyone turned to see a man, clad in a ski mask and holding a gun, storming into the produce section. The air was suddenly filled with screams and the clatter of carts as shoppers scrambled for cover. "Everyone down," the man shouted, waving the gun wildly. "Nobody moves, and nobody gets hurt." Monique's heart pounded in her chest as she instinctively ducked behind a display of watermelons. Karen, now pale and trembling, froze in place, her earlier bravado gone. The gunman's eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on Karen before moving on. Monique's mind raced as she assessed the situation. She had faced danger before, though never like this. But years of training in negotiation and strategy had taught her how to think under pressure. She glanced around, looking for anything she could use to defuse the situation. The gunman's voice rang out again. "I said, get down. Now." Karen finally dropped to the floor, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. Monique stayed low, inching her way toward an emergency exit she had spotted near the back of the store. If she could get to it, she might be able to alert the authorities without drawing attention. But as she moved, a loud shout stopped her in her tracks. "Hey, you! Hoodie! Where do you think you're going?" Monique turned slowly to find the gunman staring directly at her, his weapon pointed in her direction. The room seemed to go silent, the weight of his gaze suffocating. The aftermath of the standoff left the grocery store in a state of stunned silence. Shoppers huddled together in small groups, murmuring in hushed tones as they tried to process what had just happened. Police officers moved swiftly through the aisles, taking statements and guiding people toward the exit. Monique, still seated on the cold tile floor, took a moment to catch her breath. Her hands were steady now, the adrenaline ebbing away as her mind replayed the encounter. She had always been a quick thinker, but this was a situation she hadn't prepared for. And yet, she couldn't help but feel a sense of calm. She had done the right thing. Lives had been saved. Karen, however, was far from calm. She hovered over Monique like a storm cloud, her face flushed with a mix of anger and residual fear. "Do you have any idea how reckless that was?" she hissed, her voice low but seething. "You could have gotten us all killed with your little hero act." Monique pushed herself to her feet, dusting off her jeans. She turned to face Karen, her expression unreadable. "I didn't see you doing anything to help," she said evenly. "Maybe next time, you can take the lead." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. Before she could respond, a uniformed officer approached them, his notepad in hand. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, addressing Monique. "We need to take your statement." Monique nodded, grateful for the interruption. She followed the officer to a quieter corner of the store, leaving Karen standing alone in the aisle. As the officer asked her questions, Monique recounted the events as accurately as she could, keeping her emotions in check. She had learned long ago how to remain composed under pressure, a skill that had served her well in boardrooms and now, apparently, in life-threatening situations. When the officer finished, he gave her a small nod of appreciation. "That was brave, what you did," he said. "Not many people would have kept their cool like that." "Thank you," Monique replied, her tone measured. "But I wasn't trying to be brave. I just did what I thought was necessary." The officer smiled faintly. "Well, it worked. You kept him distracted long enough for us to get here. That could have ended a lot worse." As the officer walked away, Monique let out a deep breath. She wasn't one for accolades or praise. Her focus had always been on the bigger picture, whether it was in business or life. And right now, the bigger picture was getting out of this store and leaving the chaos behind. But Karen wasn't ready to let things go. As Monique made her way toward the exit, Karen reappeared at her side, her face still tight with indignation. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" she snapped. "Playing the hero, acting like you're better than everyone else." Monique stopped in her tracks and turned to face Karen. Her patience was wearing thin, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I'm not playing anything," she said. "I just wanted to make sure everyone got out of here safely. Including you." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Oh, please. Don't act like you did it for me. I saw the way you looked at me earlier, like you were judging me." Monique raised an eyebrow. "Judging you? That's rich, coming from a woman who couldn't wait to insult me 5 minutes after meeting me." Karen flushed, but she didn't back down. "I was just, look, you don't understand. People like you always think you can just push people like me around." Monique blinked, momentarily stunned by the audacity of the statement. "People like me," she repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. "You mean people who mind their own business and try to live their lives without being harassed?" Karen opened her mouth to respond, but Monique held up a hand to stop her. "You know what? I don't have the energy for this. If you want to keep playing the victim, go ahead. But I'm done." With that, Monique turned and walked away, her stride confident and unbothered. Karen stood frozen, her face a mixture of anger and embarrassment as she watched Monique disappear into the crowd. As Monique stepped out into the parking lot, she was greeted by a swarm of flashing lights and police vehicles. Reporters had already gathered, their cameras trained on the store as they shouted questions at anyone who emerged. Monique pulled her hood up, hoping to avoid the spotlight. She had managed to keep her identity hidden so far, and she wasn't about to blow her cover now. She made her way to her car, a modest sedan that blended in with the sea of vehicles. It was part of her strategy to remain incognito, no flashy cars or designer bags when she wanted to go unnoticed. But as she unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat, she couldn't shake the feeling that this day wasn't over yet. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to find a text from her assistant, Deidre. Deidre ***, are you okay? I just saw the news about the store. Call me as soon as you can ***. Monique sighed and typed out a quick response. Monique ***, I'm fine. Just heading home now. We'll call later ***. She tucked the phone away and started the car, eager to put the day's events behind her. But as she pulled out of the parking lot, she caught a glimpse of Karen in her rearview mirror, standing near the store entrance. Her arms were crossed, and she was glaring after Monique with a look that sent a chill down her spine. Monique shook her head and focused on the road. She had dealt with people like Karen before, small-minded, self-righteous individuals who thrived on conflict. But there was something about this particular Karen that unsettled her. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she had a feeling this wasn't the last she'd see of her. As Monique drove away, her mind wandered to the events of the day. She had come to the store seeking normalcy, a brief escape from her high-profile life. Instead, she had found herself at the center of a life-threatening ordeal. And though she had managed to keep her cool, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that her cover had been blown in some way. She glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was late, and she was exhausted. All she wanted now was to get home, take a long bath, and forget this day ever happened. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't be that simple. Welcome to a story hub Karen dedicated
wasn't done
to
with her
exposing,
yet.
understanding, and discussing stories. Here, we dive deep into real-life experiences. By sharing these stories, we hope to create awareness, inspire change, and encourage open dialogue. If you're passionate about building a fairer world, please join us, like, comment, and subscribe to support the community and keep up with new stories each day. The drive home was supposed to be Monique's time to decompress, but her mind wouldn't rest. The encounter with Karen and the chaos at the store looped endlessly in her thoughts. She had hoped to stay under the radar and enjoy a quiet day out, but now she was rattled. More than that, she was angry. As Monique approached the gates of her sprawling estate, a 10-acre property shrouded by towering trees and surrounded by state-of-the-art security, she forced herself to take a few deep breaths. Her security system beeped as her car was recognized, and the gates opened automatically. She pulled into the driveway, flanked by manicured gardens and a sparkling fountain, and parked her unassuming sedan in the garage. Her assistant, Deidre, was already waiting for her in the foyer. Deidre was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her early 40s who had worked with Monique for nearly a decade. She knew when to push and when to step back, but the worry etched on her face was unmistakable. "Boss," Deidre said, crossing her arms as Monique entered, "you've got some explaining to do. What were you doing in that grocery store? Alone?" Monique dropped her keys on the table and shrugged off her jacket. "I wanted some peace," she replied, her tone weary. "And I got the opposite." Deidre followed her into the kitchen, where Monique poured herself a glass of water. "I saw the news," Deidre continued. "They're calling you a hero. No names mentioned yet, but how long do you think it'll take before someone puts two and two together?" Monique sighed. She knew Deidre was right. Though she had managed to keep her identity hidden during the ordeal, she couldn't count on that anonymity lasting. People were observant, and the internet was relentless. "I'm not worried about the press," she said. "I just didn't expect her." Her? Deidre frowned. "Karen," Monique said, her lips curling into a faint smirk despite herself. "You know the type. Entitled. Loud. And racist as hell." Deidre winced. "What happened?" Monique recounted the incident, her voice steady but laced with irritation. She told Deidre about the insults, the way Karen had tried to humiliate her, and how the situation had escalated with the armed robber. By the time she finished, Deidre was shaking her head in disbelief. "And she's still mad at you?" Deidre asked incredulously. "Oh, she's more than mad," Monique said. "She looked like she wanted to follow me home and finish the fight herself." Deidre's eyes narrowed. "You don't think she would, do you?" Monique hesitated. She had dismissed the idea at first, but Karen's intense glare in the parking lot had unsettled her. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I'm not taking any chances." Deidre didn't need to be told twice. She immediately pulled out her phone and began making calls. Monique trusted her to handle the necessary precautions, updating the security team, ensuring the gates were monitored closely, and alerting the local authorities if needed. Monique headed upstairs to her bedroom, peeling off her clothes as she went. She needed a hot shower to wash away the tension of the day. As the steam enveloped her, she closed her eyes and let the water cascade over her, trying to block out the day's events. But even in the privacy of her bathroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done with her. Later that evening, Monique settled into her home office to go over some business reports. The familiar routine helped ground her, but her focus kept drifting. She was halfway through reviewing a proposal when Deidre burst in, her face pale. "We've got a problem," Deidre said, holding up her phone. Monique frowned and gestured for her to continue. "It's Karen," Deidre said, her voice tight. "She went on social media." Monique's stomach sank. "What did she say?" Deidre handed her the phone, and Monique skimmed through the post. Karen had taken to her favorite platform to vent her frustration, painting herself as the victim of the grocery store encounter. She described Monique as aggressive, rude, and, unsurprisingly, intimidating. She had even managed to include a blurry photo of Monique taken from behind, her face obscured but her figure recognizable to anyone who knew her well. The comments were already piling up. Some people were siding with Karen, while others were calling her out for her obvious bias. But the post was gaining traction, and it was only a matter of time before someone connected the dots. "She's trying to turn this into a spectacle," Monique said, her voice calm but laced with irritation. Deidre nodded. "And the media's eating it up. They're starting to ask questions. If they figure out who you are." "They won't," Monique said firmly. "Not yet, at least." "But Karen just made this personal." Deidre arched an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" Monique leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I've dealt with people like her before. She thrives on attention, on being the center of the drama. She's expecting me to lash out, to fight back publicly. But I won't give her that satisfaction." "So what's the plan?" Deidre asked. Monique's lips curved into a faint smile. "I'll let her think she's won, for now. But when the time is right, she'll regret ever crossing me." Deidre grinned. "Now that's the Monique I know." As the night wore on, Monique kept a close eye on the situation. Karen's posts continued to gain traction, but Monique stayed quiet. She wasn't one to react impulsively, and she knew better than to feed into Karen's antics. Instead, she used the time to strategize, carefully considering her next move. But even as she planned, a nagging feeling lingered at the back of her mind. Karen wasn't just after attention, she was after revenge. And Monique knew all too well that people like Karen didn't play fair. Around midnight, Monique's security team called to report an unusual disturbance near the estate's perimeter. A car had been parked just outside the gates for nearly an hour, its headlights off. When the guards approached, the vehicle sped away. Monique's chest tightened. "Did you get a plate number?" she asked. "We're reviewing the footage now," the guard replied. Monique nodded, her jaw set. She wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but the timing was too suspicious to ignore. If Karen was behind this, she had just crossed a line. Monique turned to Deidre, who was still seated across from her. "Double the security," she said. "And tell the team to stay alert." Monique woke up to the steady buzz isn't over yet. Groggy but alert, she grabbed it from her nightstand and squinted at the screen. Multiple missed calls and a slew of messages lit up her notifications. Most were from her security team, but a few were from Deidre. The subject line of one email caught her attention immediately. *urgent, Karen's escalation. Throwing on a robe, Monique made her way to the living room, where the glow of the estate surveillance system filled the space. Deidre was already there, seated in front of a large monitor. A fresh cup of coffee sat untouched beside her as she scrutinized footage from the previous night. "What's going on?" Monique asked, her voice steady despite the apprehension building in her chest. Deidre turned, her expression grim. Karen's car was spotted outside the gates again early this morning. She wasn't alone this time. Monique stiffened. "She brought someone with her." Deidre nodded, clicking on a grainy still from the footage. The image showed Karen standing near her car, gesturing animatedly at a man whose face was partially obscured. The timestamp indicated it was taken just before sunrise. "We don't know who he is yet," Deidre continued. "But he didn't stay long." After a few minutes, Karen drove off. "The team is running the plates now." Monique's mind raced. Karen was escalating, and while Monique had hoped to handle things quietly, it was clear that confrontation was inevitable. "Double the patrols around the perimeter," she said. "I don't want any surprises." Deidre hesitated, then asked the question that had been on both their minds. "Do you think she knows who you are?" Monique sighed. "If she doesn't know yet, she's close. Karen strikes me as the type who won't stop until she gets the last word, or worse." Deidre's brow furrowed. "So what's the next move?" Monique's lips pressed into a thin line. "We wait. But not passively. I want to know everything about her, who she is, where she works, and why she's so intent on making this personal. If she wants a battle, she should know who she's dealing with." By mid-afternoon, Monique's private investigator had sent over a detailed report on Karen. The information was both predictable and surprising. Karen Peterson, age 43, was a stay-at-home mom with an active social media presence. Her online activity was filled with rants about perceived injustices and thinly veiled racist commentary. But what caught Monique's attention was Karen's history of filing baseless lawsuits against local businesses and individuals, claiming discrimination or emotional distress. "She's a professional victim," Monique muttered as she skimmed the report. "She's also desperate," Deidre added, reading over her shoulder. "Looks like she's in serious debt. Credit cards maxed out, house close to foreclosure. She's probably hoping for a payout." Monique leaned back in her chair, her mind working rapidly. Karen's motivations were becoming clearer, but her actions still didn't sit right. People like Karen usually thrived on drama from a distance. Showing up in person, especially with someone else in tow, suggested a more sinister agenda. That evening, Monique decided to step out of the shadows. She logged into her private social media account, the one she rarely used, and posted a brief but pointed message. To the woman who tried to make me feel small in a grocery store, your ignorance speaks louder than your insults. I suggest you move on before you regret your choices. She knew the post would spread quickly, and it wasn't long before the comments started rolling in. Most people were supportive, but a few questioned whether she was escalating the situation unnecessarily. Monique didn't respond. She had said what she needed to, and now the ball was in Karen's court. Meanwhile, Karen was fuming. She had seen the post and knew exactly who it was aimed at. Her cheeks burned as she read through the comments, many of which mocked her behavior at the store. She had wanted to paint herself as the victim, but the narrative was slipping out of her control. "She thinks she's so clever," Karen muttered, pacing her living room. The man from the footage, her cousin, Greg, watched her from the couch, a beer in hand. "Why don't you just let it go?" Greg asked, his tone indifferent. "She's obviously got more resources than you." Karen whirled on him. "I can't let her win. Do you know how embarrassing this is? She humiliated me, and now she's trying to make me look like the bad guy." Greg shrugged. "You're making yourself look like the bad guy." Karen glared at him but said nothing. Instead, she grabbed her phone and started typing furiously. She wasn't going to let Monique get the last word. If Monique wanted to play games, Karen would take things to the next level. Back at the estate, Monique's security team alerted her to another potential threat. Karen had posted a live video, calling Monique out directly. Though she still didn't know Monique's true identity, she had pieced together enough to issue a public challenge. "She wants a confrontation," Dieter said, her voice laced with disbelief. "She's practically begging for it." Monique watched the video, her expression unreadable. Karen's words were filled with vitriol, but there was a desperation beneath the surface that Monique couldn't ignore. It was the flailing of someone who knew they were outmatched but refused to admit defeat. "She's unhinged," Deidre said. "We should report this to the authorities." "Not yet," Monique replied. "Let her dig her own grave first. The more she rants, the more she exposes herself." But as calm as Monique appeared, she couldn't shake the nagging sense that Karen's desperation could lead her to do something reckless. And while Monique had no intention of backing down, she knew she had to be prepared for anything. Just after midnight, the estate's alarms blared. Monique shot out of bed, her heart pounding. Within seconds, her security team was on high alert, scanning the perimeter for intruders. Deidre appeared in the hallway, her phone pressed to her ear. "What's going on?" Monique demanded. "Motion sensors picked up activity near the south gate," Deidre said. "The team's checking it out now." Monique followed her to the control room, where live footage from the surveillance cameras filled the screens. One camera showed a shadowy figure near the gate, fiddling with the lock. Another angle revealed a second person lingering nearby, their face obscured by a hoodie. "Is that Karen?" Deidre asked, squinting at the screen. Monique's stomach tightened. It was hard to tell, but the figure's build and posture were eerily familiar. "Alert the authorities," Monique said, her voice firm. "And tell the team to stay out of sight. Let's see what they're planning." As the seconds ticked by, Monique's resolve hardened. Karen had crossed a line, and there would be no turning back now. The tension in the estate's control room was palpable. Monique stood at the center of it all, her eyes locked on the screen displaying the intruders. The figures near the south gate had retreated to their car, but they hadn't left. The vehicle remained parked just beyond the property's security perimeter, its headlights off and engine idling. Deidre paced back and forth, phone in hand. "The local authorities are en route," she said, her voice clipped. "But it might take them a while to get here. They're dealing with an accident on the main highway." Monique's gaze never wavered from the screen. "We're not waiting for them. Get the security team ready. I want every corner of this property locked down. No one gets in or out without my say-so." Deidre nodded and began issuing orders to the guards stationed around the estate. Meanwhile, Monique turned her attention to the live feed, watching as the figures moved cautiously around the perimeter. They're looking for a weak spot, she murmured to herself. Her suspicions were confirmed moments later when one of the intruders produced a crowbar from the car and began prying at the gate. The other figure, whom Monique now recognized as Karen, stood nearby, her phone raised as if recording the act. She's documenting this? Deidre asked incredulously. What's her endgame here? Leverage, Monique replied. She thinks she can twist this into her narrative. Make me look like the aggressor if I retaliate. Monique's jaw tightened. Karen was cunning, but she wasn't prepared for what Monique had in store. Activate the floodlights, she ordered. A moment later, the estate's security system roared to life. Blinding lights illuminated the south gate, casting the intruders in stark relief. Karen and her accomplice froze like deer in headlights, their plans momentarily derailed. Who's there? Karen shouted, her voice wavering. Monique grabbed the intercom microphone connected to the estate's external speakers. You're trespassing on private property, she said, her tone icy. Leave now, or you'll regret it. Karen's head snapped toward the source of the voice. You think you can scare me? She yelled. You're nothing but a fraud hiding behind your walls and your money. Monique's lips curled into a cold smile. You're out of your depth, Karen. Turn around before you make things worse for yourself. Instead of retreating, Karen squared her shoulders and stepped closer to the gate. You think you're untouchable, don't you? She sneered. Well, I've got news for you. People like me don't back down. Monique sighed. Karen's bravado was almost impressive, but it was clear she didn't grasp the gravity of the situation. Have it your way, Monique said, switching off the intercom. She turned to Deidre. Release the drones. Deidre's eyes widened. Are you sure? That feels excessive. Monique's expression was stone cold. She's been warned. Now we show her what she's up against. Outside, Karen flinched as a low buzzing sound filled the air. From the shadows of the estate, two sleek drones emerged, their red lights blinking ominously. They hovered just above the ground, their cameras trained on Karen and her accomplice. What the hell is that? Greg muttered, taking a step back. Karen's bravado faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. They're just trying to scare us, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. The drones whirred closer, circling the intruders like vultures. One of them emitted a sharp, metallic voice, asterisk, you are trespassing. Leave immediately, or force will be used. Asterisk. Greg dropped the crowbar and raised his hands. Karen, we need to get out of here. But Karen wasn't ready to back down. Fueled by rage and a warped sense of entitlement, she marched toward the gate, her phone still recording. You think your toys can scare me? She shouted. You're nothing but a coward hiding behind your money. Inside the control room, Monique shook her head. She doesn't know when to quit, she muttered. Deidre crossed her arms. Should we call the drones back? Let the authorities handle this? Monique considered it for a moment, then shook her head. No. Let's see how far she's willing to go. Karen's outburst was cut short when the drones emitted a series of loud beeps, followed by a sharp burst of air that knocked her off balance. Her phone flew from her hand and landed in the dirt, its screen shattered. You can't do that. Karen screamed, scrambling to her feet. That's assault. The drones hovered menacingly, their cameras capturing every moment. Karen's accomplice had already retreated to the car, his courage evaporating. Karen, get in the car. Greg shouted. This isn't worth it. But Karen wasn't listening. She lunged for the gate, gripping the bars as if she could tear them down with her bare hands. You can't hide forever, she yelled. I'll make sure the whole world knows what kind of person you are. From the control room, Monique watched in silence. She could feel the anger bubbling beneath her calm exterior, but she refused to let Karen get the better of her. Instead, she reached for the microphone again. "You've made your point, Karen," she said, her voice echoing through the speakers. "Now it's my turn. Leave while you still can." Karen's response was a string of incoherent curses, but the sound of approaching sirens cut her tirade short. The local authorities had finally arrived, their flashing lights visible in the distance. Monique leaned back in her chair, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "Let them handle her," she said. Deidre nodded, her expression one of relief. "What do we do if she comes back?" "She won't," Monique replied, though a part of her knew that wasn't entirely true. People like Karen didn't disappear quietly. As the police escorted Karen and Greg away, Monique allowed herself a moment to breathe. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the battle was far from over. Karen had made it clear she wasn't going to back down, and Monique knew she couldn't afford to let her guard down. The night was quiet again, but the tension lingered. Monique stared out at the darkened estate, her mind racing with possibilities. The game was escalating, and Karen had no idea who she was playing against. The following morning, Monique woke to a sense of unease that lingered despite the calm outside. The police had taken Karen and Greg into custody, charging them with trespassing and attempting to damage private property. But Monique knew Karen's stubbornness wasn't something that could be easily subdued. She sat in her office, a cup of coffee untouched on the desk beside her. Deidre entered with a stack of papers, her expression a mix of satisfaction and worry. "The authorities processed her overnight," Deidre said, setting the papers down. "Karen's been released on bail. They impounded Greg's car, but she's already stirring the pot online." Monique's eyes narrowed. "What's she saying?" "She's claiming you're a fraud, accusing you of using excessive force, and threatening to take legal action," Deidre replied. "But the footage from last night paints a very different picture. If anything, it'll work in your favor." Monique exhaled slowly. "Let her dig her own grave. But I want our legal team ready to counter anything she tries to throw at us." Deidre nodded. "Already on it. But there's something else you should know." "What is it?" Deidre hesitated, then handed Monique her tablet. The screen displayed a news article with a bold headline, **, Billionaire heiress Monique Ellington's secret identity exposed amid racial dispute. **. Monique's heart sank as she read the article. It detailed her philanthropic work, her hidden identity, and her encounter with Karen in the grocery store. The author speculated about her motives for remaining anonymous and criticized Karen's behavior, but the exposure was a blow nonetheless. "She must have sold the story," Monique said, her voice calm but strained. "Possibly," Deidre replied. "But it's not all bad. Public sentiment is overwhelmingly in your favor. Most people see Karen for what she is." Monique set the tablet down and leaned back in her chair. "It's not just about public opinion. My anonymity allowed me to move through the world without being constantly scrutinized. That's gone now." Deidre placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've always been transparent about your intentions, Monique. People admire you for that. And if Karen thinks she can tarnish your reputation, she's in for a rude awakening." That afternoon, Monique decided to confront the situation head-on. She scheduled a press conference at one of her community centers, inviting local journalists and community leaders. Dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, she addressed the crowd with the poise and confidence that had earned her respect in both business and philanthropy. "Yes, it's true," she began. "I have maintained a low profile to focus on my work without distraction. My goal has always been to uplift communities and create opportunities, not to seek recognition." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. "As for the events of the past week, I believe they speak for themselves. Hate has no place in our society, and I will not allow it to derail the work we've accomplished together." The audience erupted into applause, and Monique felt a surge of determination. Karen's attempts to smear her had backfired spectacularly. Karen, meanwhile, was seething in her small, cluttered living room. The press conference was being broadcast live, and every word Monique spoke felt like a personal attack. "She's playing the victim," Karen muttered, pacing back and forth. "She's twisting everything." Greg, who had been avoiding Karen since their arrest, finally spoke up. "Maybe it's time to let this go, Karen. You're not going to win." Karen spun on him, her eyes blazing. "I'm not a quitter, Greg. She humiliated me, and I won't stop until she pays for it." Greg sighed and left the room, leaving Karen alone with her simmering rage. A few days later, Monique received a call from her legal team. "Karen's filed a lawsuit," they informed her. "She's claiming emotional distress and damage to her reputation." Monique laughed humorlessly. "Of course she is. Let's counter with our own lawsuit, for trespassing, harassment, and defamation. Make it clear that we won't settle." The legal battle quickly became public, with headlines dissecting every detail. But as the weeks went on, it became clear that Karen's case was crumbling. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and her online rants only hurt her credibility. Finally, Karen's lawyer approached Monique's team with a plea for settlement. Monique refused. "She needs to learn that actions have consequences," Monique said firmly. The courtroom was packed on the day of the final hearing. Monique sat calmly, her presence commanding respect. Karen, on the other hand, fidgeted nervously beside her lawyer, her confidence visibly shaken. The judge's verdict was swift and decisive. Karen was ordered to pay restitution for trespassing and damages, and her lawsuit was dismissed as frivolous. As Monique exited the courthouse, reporters bombarded her with questions. She stopped briefly to address them. "This isn't just about me," she said. "It's about standing up to hate and showing that it has no place in our society. I hope this serves as a reminder that we are stronger together and that kindness will always triumph over ignorance." The crowd erupted into cheers, and Monique walked away, her head held high. Back at her estate, Monique sat with Deidre, reflecting on the events of the past few months. "You handled that brilliantly," Deidre said. Monique smiled faintly. "It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. People like Karen thrive on fear and division. The best way to defeat them is to stay true to who you are." Deidre raised her glass in a toast. "To strength and resilience." Monique clinked her glass against Deidre's. "And to a brighter future." As the sun set over the estate, Monique felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in weeks. The battle was over, and she had emerged stronger than ever.